Welcome to the CSBP Fertilisers Grow Better podcast, sharing knowledge with growers on leading crop nutrition, sustainable agriculture and other issues impacting the agricultural industry.
G'day everyone and welcome to another episode of the CSBP Grow Better podcast. My name's Grey Johnston and very pleased to be joined for his second appearance on the podcast today, Luigi Moreschi, Account Manager up in Mingenew region for CSBP. G'day Luigi.
G'day Grey, how are you?
I look very well, thanks. How are you doing?
Not too bad.
Good, pleased to hear it. Small talk over with. We're pleased to talk today about a trial that you were heavily involved in last year up in Three Springs. But before we get into that, normally on the show we get our guests to introduce themselves to the listeners, and you've of course done that in your first episode that no doubt all our listeners have already seen last year. So instead we thought, given we're celebrating 100 years of the field research program at CSBP this year, you I think told us when you were last on the show that you started out at CSBP with heavy involvement in field research. Can you share a little bit of your memories of the program?
I did, yeah. I started way back in November 1989 and started with the CSBP field research team based there in, actually back then it was based at Bassendean, which now if you go past there, it's all bloody industrial buildings and stuff on the site now. So that's changed dramatically. And so even the changes from that year when I first started with the type of seeding gear we had back then versus what we've got now, it's changed dramatically. So, and I spent 4 years in the trials team and loved every minute of it, getting out of the city and getting out and basically just about seeing every town and sighting around the state, basically travelling from Esperance way up to, we had trials at Benue where we, I think one harvest when we couldn't get any good weather to harvest, we actually ended up staying up in Kalbarri for 3 or 4 days waiting for the weather to come good. So, yeah. But, they were good memories with the trials, a good bunch of guys there. So, yeah, and learnt a lot going into my role that I have now. When I've then changed into becoming an area manager, I'd seen a lot of responses, a lot of trials on different soil types, different rates of NPK, all the different deficiency symptoms, had them all pretty well at least down pat and not going into the job totally green. So it was a good training ground for me.
Good, and look, nice to hear that we should be keeping our eye on our ag officers to make sure they're not sneaking off to Kalbarri for a few days on the job. Or we certainly making sure we do that going forth in future. Now, you talked trials there, which brings us to the topic of our discussion today, which is a trial you had some heavy involvement with in Three Springs last year, and particularly it's linked to, I guess, a new product in our program. Can you tell us a bit about the trial and what we saw?
Yep, obviously, we obviously need to get some data on this new product that we're looking at bringing to market called Sustain, which is a urease inhibitor. So obviously there we looked at a site there, which we then applied, looked at applying the urea with the Sustain versus just straight urea. And the circumstances there were pretty good because when we applied the nitrogen post-emergent, so the crop would have been probably, I think, 3 or 4 leaf stage. We put the urea out. Most listeners would recognise last year that the last decent rain we had in June was around about the 20th, and then we had a 20-day dry spell up till about the 10th of July. And we actually timed it really well to test the capability of this urea Sustain to mitigate volatilisation, because we actually top dressed the urea onto a wet soil surface literally the day after the last rain we had. So it went onto a wet soil surface. We had some nice little dews for the next 4 or 5 days after that to keep the wet soil surface ticking along. And then we didn't have rain for 20 days. So really, when it comes down to it, ideal situation for volatilisation to occur. So we nailed it in that circumstance. We probably didn't necessarily want to go into a situation where we had rain 2 days later because we wouldn't have been able to test the product out. So it actually worked out well in that way.
And I think probably most listeners who are listening to us have heard us talk about these volatilization and urease inhibitors before. But just for anyone who's not familiar, can you just touch quickly on what that volatilization phenomenon is?
Yep. So basically, urea in the presence of moisture will sort of pretty well convert straight across to ammonium in literally 24 to 48 hours, so pretty rapidly. And that rapid conversion of that urea to ammonium forms this ammonium bicarbonate, which makes it quite alkaline around that urea granule. And that alkalinity then can drive the ammonium to potentially become ammonia gas and then go off as volatilized nitrogen, I guess, in a way. So, and I guess with the urease inhibitor is what we're trying to do is slow that step down and pretty well I think it slows it down literally to within, instead of 24 to 48 hours, the urea is getting converted across in sort of that 2 week time span. So, and I think what's happening there is then we're not getting that rapid production of ammonium bicarbonate, so we're not getting that high pH area around the granule, which then is mitigating the effect of the ammonium wanting to become ammonia gas. So we're able to reduce the volatilization potential of the urea quite dramatically.
And I guess in the absence of the product, I guess that volatilization phenomena, that's why I guess in general growers are trying to get their urea out just before a big rain event. Is that the way to think about it?
Correct. So most guys would try and get it out within 2 or 3 days of a rain coming. Obviously, with most guys with big programs, it's getting more difficult to do that. So most guys, if they want to get in front of that rain, might need to start 7 or 8 or 9 days out to get across their program if they want to pick that nitrogen, if they want that nitrogen to get washed in with that rain. And these days, it probably some of these rainfall events are becoming more critical because the next rainfall event mightn't be for another 3 weeks. So if you miss that one, then you're weighing up, well, if my crop is starved for another 3 weeks, how much do I lose there versus what I lose to volatilization? So most guys will take the chance of going out a bit earlier and trying to make sure they get in front of this rain. So
then back on the trial, it sounds like whether through good luck or good management, or maybe a combination of both, we got the Urea Sustain and the urea treatments out, sort of at the perfect time to test whether this volatilization inhibiting process works. And I guess that leads us to what was the result?
We did, and we got some really good results from having the Sustain put onto the urea to the point where increases. So what we did was applied the urea at 20, 40, 60, 80 of N, and also so with and without the Sustain. And at all those different rates, we got somewhere between 18 to 24% increase in yield by having the urea with the Sustain on it versus having the urea on its own. And so when we're looking at that, we're talking somewhere between, at the lower rates of N, at the 20 and 40, we're talking increases in yield of around 300 to 400 kilos. And at the higher rates of 60 and 80, we're talking like, I think it was between sort of 700 and 800 kilo yield differences between the urea and the Urea Sustain, which, at whatever you like, $350 a tonne can make it, it's a substantial difference in the profitability between those two products.
And I guess that would more than outweigh the cost of adding the Sustain?
Absolutely. Because obviously, we're sort of at some, adding the Sustain, we're sort of talking like $5 a hectare at 100 kilos of urea. So, that's we're recovering those costs very quickly with the improvements of not just the lost cost of the N that we've gone and bought, but it's what that N that we've lost, what that then would add in terms of production. So in other words, if a farmer wanted 40 of N, well, he wants the crop to see 40 of N. He doesn't want the crop to see 30 of N, because that 10 of N is obviously what was giving us the additional response between the urea and the Urea Sustain, because the crop actually had the 40 units of N there in front of it, not 30 after some of it had volatilized off. So it's probably the easiest way of explaining it.
Yep. And I guess we didn't go out and exactly measure the ammonia coming off the untreated urea strip, but I mean we have to infer that it was the sustain that's driving the difference in those yields.
Absolutely, yeah. So I looked at having a look at the recovery of nitrogen between the urea and the urea sustain in terms of the grain and the yield we were getting and the protein that we were getting, and it was sort of intimating that we're getting somewhere between 20 to 25% losses of that nitrogen, because that's the amount of extra N that we didn't recover where we didn't put the urease inhibitor. So yeah.
And so those results tie reasonably well with, I guess, results that we see in the published research?
I think there's obviously the one that's quoted a fair bit is that CSIRO study in Meriden in 1995 by Ian Fillery. But I think there's been a couple of other studies done which basically pretty well got the same results that Ian Fillery did back in Meriden, where he showed that under good ideal conditions for volatilisation that we lost up to between 30 and 35% of our nitrogen was lost to volatilisation. So we probably didn't quite get there with this trial, but we still got pretty close to those sort of levels, I think. So mainly because of the timing that we applied and the lack of rainfall that came straight afterwards.
And so Urea Sustain has, I guess, a second component in it, the nitrification inhibitor. That's probably less relevant to you in this trial? For
us, potentially up here, it's probably, with climate change and the fact that we've probably in this northern area, we've lost probably 3 inches of rainfall, and most of that's come out of the front end of the season in that May, June, early part of July, which when I first got up here, June and July were very wet months. You never went more than, 4 or 5 days without a rain. Now we have lots of years where critical time period there when we're applying nitrogen, we can get weeks where we get in June or July, get nothing for 3 weeks. So for us, leaching's probably not the main issue really. It's probably about applying that nitrogen, getting in front of these, I guess, less frequent rainfalls, but making sure that nitrogen's still there when the rain comes to get washed into the plant so that the plant gets the full dose of N and some of it hasn't actually volatilised off in the meantime.
So I guess then you're excited about this product and you talk to some growers about it?
Yep, I think it's got real potential for a lot of guys, particularly with big programs. I mean, guys go flat out pretty well, they go 24 hours a day, which you can with GPS units these days. You can spread at night time too, but it's putting a lot of pressure on manpower, people, etc. That with this urease inhibitor, that if it allows you that we don't lose the urea, we don't have to go 24, 48 hours before the rain, we can go out 5, 6, 7 days. It just spreads the workload across those guys a bit better and gives everyone a bit of a chance to rest and still get that nitrogen out and still feel comfortable that most of that nitrogen is going to be available to the crop when it needs it.
And you'll have it in the research program again in your area this year?
So we definitely will be looking at it again. So this year we're sort of planning to sort of come a bit closer to the coast where it's a bit wetter. Looking at with the MIG group on their main trial site, on their main Semplane trial site this year, and pretty well just replicating the same treatments that we applied last year to that trial site at Three Springs. We'll do exactly the same treatments again this year onto that trial site at Minginoo, or sort of in between sort of Donga and Minginoo there. So, yep.
And anything else in particular you're focused on in the research program this year?
I mean, the other thing which was interesting out of that trial at Three Springs was we actually had Flexi-N in there with no inhibitor on it, and the Flexi-N on its own actually gave us the same results as the urea with sustain, which was good because we have said we generally say to growers, if the conditions are look a bit dodgy and you're not sure how much rain you're going to get, maybe using Flexi-N as an alternative nitrogen source in those sort of conditions is a better way of going, that you won't lose as much of it to volatilisation. And the beauty about the trial at Three Springs, that actually did confirm what we've been telling to growers, that yes, that the Flexi-N there performed as well as the urea plus sustain, so on its own. So,
and that was an apples to apples comparison. You spread it at 3 leaf as well.
Yeah. So same N rates, sprayed at the same time as the urea was applied, all the same. So basically we had the urea Sustain and the Flexi-N pretty well sit on top of each other in the response curve. And then we had Urea sit well underneath both those treatments when you look at the graph.
Very good. And any other focus areas for your research in the northern area this year?
Obviously, we'll look at this Urea Sustain, but we look at also maybe potentially using Urea Sustain as an alternative to spreading sulphate of ammonia out in front. Like a lot of growers would generally tend to use sulphate of ammonia to pre-spread before the season starts, 3-4 weeks out. So we're just looking at whether the Urea Sustain may be able to fill that position versus doing sulphate of ammonia, which is, it's a lot bulkier. You can't spread it quite as far. There's a lot of things there with it that that potentially, maybe the Urea Sustain may well be an alternative to actually be in that time slot for top dressing. So we'll test that out against sulphate of ammonia and Flexi-N and all those things. So they will be hopefully applied 3 to 4, around that 3 to 4 weeks prior to us seeding those treatments. So that'll give it a bit of time to see if it does do and decreases the volatilization enough to become an alternative for that timing, I suppose, of top dressing.
Some really interesting ideas there, and thank you for taking the time out to share that research from last year with us and give us a sneak into where some of your research might be heading in the coming year. And your tennis career, how's that progressing?
The old tennis career, it's all right. Yeah, I'm a pretty average player, but I do enjoy playing tennis. So.
That's not what I hear. Every bloody industry event I go to, someone comes in, Luigi, I played tennis with him. Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, probably played tennis, but not very well. But anyway, I do enjoy it. So while I've still got good knees and good ankles and stuff, I'll keep playing tennis. I do get others asking me to go and play bowls. I said, not while I can still walk. I'll keep playing tennis while I can.
All right, on that bombshell, and we should, in this day and age, say that there's no offence meant there to anyone who does play bowls. But on that bombshell, we'll say thank you very much to Luigi Moreschi for joining us today to talk us through all things Urea Sustain and nitrogen research. So thank you, Luigi.
No worries. Thanks, Gray.
And thank you all out there in podcast world for joining us for another episode of the CSBP Grow Better podcast. If you're interested to learn more about the trials program, jump on our dedicated trials website, csbpresults.com.au, to have a look at those response curves Luigi was talking about. And of course, follow us at CSBP Fertilisers on all your favourite social channels. But for now, that's it. I've been Grey Johnston. Thanks again, Luigi. See you, everyone. Goodbye.
Thanks for tuning into another episode of the CSBP Grow Better podcast. For more information about CSBP, please visit csbp-fertilisers.com.au or connect with us on social media at CSBP Fertilisers on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and LinkedIn.